Hello and Assalamu alaikum. My name is Adnan Iqbal. I welcome all of you. In this video, we are going to talk about the surface and the internal features of the heart. So hopefully you have seen the previous video, and in the previous video we have discussed about the heart overview and its blood flow, the different parts of the heart, and this video is an extension of the previous video. So if you haven't seen the previous video, please watch that video, then you will understand this lecture. So if we talk about the surface feature of the heart, this is how the surface of the heart looks like. This is the anterior surface of the heart, the anterior surface which is facing towards the front, and this is the posterior surface of the heart, the surface which is facing the back of the body. So if you look at the anterior surface of the heart, you can see the different structures, and we will try to understand what these structures are. So you can see that this is the superior vena cava, and this is the inferior vena cava through which the blood enters from all of the body to the heart. There you can see this is the aorta, and these are the branches of the aorta, and they are giving the oxygenated blood to the all parts of the body. And the aorta has three main branches. That branch is known as the brachiocephalic trunk, the middle one is known as the left common carotid artery, and this one is known as the left subclavian artery, and this is known as the aortic arc. There you can see the pulmonary veins, two pulmonary veins on the left side and two pulmonary veins on the right side, and you can also see the auricles of the atria. There we can see the circumflex artery, the left coronary artery. So basically these are the coronary arteries which are on the surface of the heart, and we will discuss the coronary arteries in the next lecture. So these are the branches of the coronary arteries which we will discuss later on. This is the left ventricle, this is the right ventricle, this is the right atria, and this is the left atria. We have discussed the chambers of the heart in the previous lectures. These are the veins, the cardiac veins, the coronary veins. So on the surface of the heart, the coronary arteries and the coronary veins you can see on the surface of the heart, both on the anterior side and both on the posterior side. So these are the coronary vessels which are giving blood supply to the heart itself. So some key points regarding the surface features of the heart. There are the superficial, on the surface of the heart you can find a superficial leaf-like extension of the atria which are known as the auricle. So this is the auricle on the right side, on the right atrium, and this is the left auricle. And there is a difference between the auricle and the atria. Basically auricles are the part of the atria, and the auricles are present superficially on the surface of the heart. So the auricles are the part of the atria, or you can also say that the auricles are the atrial appendages. And what do you mean by appendages? Appendage means anything which is attached to the larger thing. So the auricles are the atrial appendages. Auricles are smaller, so the auricles are attached to the big thing which is the atria, right? So auricles are on the superficial side. You can see that this is the right auricle which is attached to the right atria, and this is the left auricle which is attached to the left atria. And why we call it auricle? Because they look like air, so for this reason they said as a auricle. So on the surface of the heart we can find the right auricle and the left auricle, which are both the part of the right atria and the left atria. Also on the surface of the heart, we can find some grooves or depression on the surface of the heart. So this yellow color on which the coronary vessels are traveling, below the coronary vessels, they have the groove. There are the grooves or the depressions on the surface of the heart on which the coronary vessels are traveling. So these grooves or the depression on which the coronary vessels are traveling, you can see they are known as a sulcus. So they are known as a sulcus on which the coronary vessels are traveling. So these sulcus are filled with that fat which are yellow in color, and on these sulcus the coronary vessels are traveling. So they are also said as a coronary sulcus. So you can see uh, you can find the grooves on different uh, parts of the heart on the surface of the heart. You can also find this groove between the atria and the ventricle, and you can also find that groove which is present between the right ventricle and the left ventricle. So they have been named accordingly. So the groove, the sulcus which is present between the atria and the ventricle, you can also see that groove which is present between the atria and the ventricle. That grooves are known as the coronary sulcus, and these grooves are deeper. And the groove which is present between the right ventricle and the left ventricle, that grooves are known as the, or that sulcus are known as the interventricular sulcus. Interventricular sulcus. So the interventricular sulcus are the sulcus which is present between the right ventricle and the left ventricle, and the grooves which are present between the atria and the ventricle, that grooves are deeper and they are known as the coronary sulcus. So the coronary sulcus are the grooves which are present between the atria and the ventricle, and the interventricular sulcus are the grooves or depression which are present between the right ventricle and the left ventricle. So by these names you should know the locations of these grooves. And if the interventricular sulcus is on the anterior side, on the anterior surface of the heart, that is known as the anterior interventricular sulcus. And if it is on the posterior surface of the heart, on the back of the heart, then it is known as the posterior interventricular sulcus, right? So these are the coronary sulcus on the posterior side, right, which is between the atria and the ventricle, and these are the interventricular sulcus between the left ventricle and the right ventricle. These are the interventricular sulcus, you can see, and these are the coronary sulcus, right? And on these grooves or the depression or sulcus, the coronary vessels are traveling, right? This red color, this red coronary vessel is the artery, and the blue one is the coronary vein, right? And these yellow one are the fat. So let's talk about the layers of the heart. So the heart is divided into three layers which is of unequal thickness. And if we talk about the layer from the superficial, this is the superficial layer and this is the most inner layer. So the most superficial layer is known as the epicardium, and this big muscle of the heart is known as the myocardium, and the most inner layer is known as the endocardium. So these layers are of unequal thickness. Myocardium is thicker as compared to the epicardium and endocardium. So these layers are of unequal thickness, and myocardium is the most thickest layer which is responsible for the contraction of the heart, and it is the myocardium which contracts the blood out of the heart and supply the blood to all over the body. And you can see the myocardium thickness. And the epicardium, which is the superficial layer of the heart, and you know, in the previous video we have discussed about the pericardium, right? And the epicardium is the innermost layer of the pericardium, because the pericardium is the layer which is covering the heart, and pericardium also has different layers which we have discussed in the previous video. So The epicardium is the innermost layer of the pericardium. So these are the layers of the heart. So the epicardium is a superficial layer of the heart. Myocardium is the principal muscle layer which is responsible for the contraction of the heart, which is responsible for pumping of the blood, supply the blood to all part of the body through its strong contraction to its big muscle size. And the endocardium is the innermost layer of the heart, and the endocardium is the innermost layer which is uh, sur- surrounding the chambers and also lining the valves of the heart. Also, the left ventricle of the heart, this is the left ventricle and this is the right ventricle. The left ventricle of the heart is much thicker, you can see, as compared to the right ventricle. Left ventricle of the heart is much thicker as compared to the right ventricle. The reason is the left ventricle has to pump blood to all part of the body. The left ventricle, when the left ventricle contracts, it pumps the blood through the aorta to the all part of the body. So the left ventricle has to generate much pressure so the blood can reach to all part of the body. So this is the reason left ventricle is much thicker as compared to the right ventricle. But the left ventricle and the right ventricle, they both pump the same quantity of the blood at any given time. So for example, when the ventricle contracts, uh, 100 ml of blood from the left ventricle goes into the systemic circulation, and same 100 ml of the blood from the right ventricle goes into the pulmonary circulation into the lungs. So they are pumping same quantity of the blood at any given time. The only difference is in the thickness. The left ventricle are much thicker as compared to the right ventricle because the left ventricle has to generate much pressure as compared to the right ventricles. Now let's talk about the internal structures of the heart. Internally, how the heart looks like and what are the structures which are present internally in the heart. And previously we have discussed only about the surface of the heart, the structures which are present on the surface. Now we are looking at the interior of the heart. So you know that everyone knows the heart has four chambers, the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Now these chambers are partitioned with the walls. These chambers are made by the walls. They are being partitioned by the presence of the walls. Now these walls, these boundaries, they make these partitions, these four chambers. Now these partitions or walls or boundaries, they are known as the septum, right? So we uh, have named technically these boundaries as a septum, right? So the septum, which is the boundary, the septum which is present between the right atrium and the left atrium, that boundary or septum, that is known as the atrial septum. You can see the boundary or the septum which is present between the right and the left, that is known as the atrial septum. And the boundary or the wall or the septum which is present between the right ventricle and the left ventricle, that is known as the ventricular septum or the interventricular septum. And the boundary or the wall, you can see these are the valves, and with the valves we also have a septum. Now the valves and the boundary, they are the septum. Now the septum which is between the right atrium and the right ventricle, that are known as the atrioventricular septum, right? So the septum or the boundary which is between the left atrium and the left ventricle or the right atrium or the right ventricle, these septum or boundaries are known as the atrioventricular septum, atrio and ventricular septum. And the septum which in the right and the left atrium, which are known as the atrial septum, and between the right ventricle and the left ventricle are known as the ventricular septum or the interventricular septum. Now if you look at these septum or the boundaries which make the partition, these septum or the boundaries, they are made by the myocardium, which is a big muscle layer, and they are lined with the endocardium, which is the innermost layer of the heart. And the endocardium is the layer which is in direct contact with the blood of the chamber. And endocardium also line the valve of the heart. So the septum is made up of the myocardium, which is lined with the endocardium, which is the innermost layer. So this is the brief introduction of the internal structure of the heart, and in the next video, on the next lecture, we will discuss in detail about the internal structure of the heart. Thank you very much.